I've always prided myself on having everything in place. My name is James Harris, and as one of the top attorneys in Chicago, I've built a career most people can only dream of. I work at the largest law firm in the city, with a view from my office that stretches across the skyline, an endless horizon of ambition and success. My colleagues respect me, my clients trust me, and my life, by all measures, is perfect. At home, things are just as good. Olivia, my wife of 5 years, is everything I could have asked for. Stunningly beautiful, sharp, and ambitious, she's also a partner at the same firm. We work in the same world, shoulder to shoulder, constantly pushing each other to do better, be better. Together, we seemed invincible. Our lives were carefully curated: luxury cars, a stunning home in Lincoln Park, and all the perks that come with being at the top of the legal ladder. But lately, something has changed. I can't quite place my finger on it, but it feels like there's a shift in the air between Olivia and me. A subtle distance that's hard to define but impossible to ignore. It started with small things. A coldness in her eyes when we talked, an impatience that hadn't been there before. Her laughter didn't sound quite as genuine. She seemed distant, distracted, like her mind was elsewhere. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was imagining things, but it didn't take long before the suspicion began to grow. There was one particular night that stuck with me. I'd come home late after a long day at the firm as usual, and I found Olivia in the study, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't hear me enter, so I watched her for a moment, trying to read her face. There was a strange look on it, like she was deep in thought, but not the good kind. When she saw me, she quickly hid her phone, her eyes flickering with guilt before she composed herself. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long day?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone light. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For the next few days, I kept my distance, letting the unease fester. I was busy at work, so I didn't have time to confront her, but the thoughts kept swirling. What was happening between us? Was it just the stress of our jobs, or was there something more to it? Then came the moment I never saw coming, the moment that would change everything. One afternoon, I was working late in my office when I received an unexpected email. It wasn't from a client or a colleague, but from a private investigator I had hired weeks earlier, just to ease my growing doubts. The subject line was simple: information on Olivia. I opened it with trembling hands, knowing that whatever I'd find inside would be a turning point in my life. The email contained photos. Olivia, with Mark, my colleague, the young, talented, and ambitious attorney who had been making waves at the firm. They were together in a secluded restaurant, laughing, their hands touching across the table. The images were clear, unmistakable, and there was no denying the chemistry between them. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the discovery sinking in. My mind raced. It felt like the floor had just been ripped out from under me. Olivia and Mark? Together? The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, but I couldn't allow myself to break down. I had worked too hard, built too much. There had to be a way to handle this. A way to make sure this didn't destroy everything I had built. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my mind spinning with the possibilities of what this meant. I had trusted Olivia more than anyone in the world. We had built our lives together, our careers intertwined. And yet, here she was, betraying me in the most painful way imaginable. But it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about something much darker. Mark wasn't just a lover. He had an agenda. A dangerous one. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, a chilling realization hit me. Olivia and Mark had a plan. They were conspiring to push me out of the firm and take everything I had worked for. The ambition that drove them was as cold as it was ruthless. They were after my position, my success, and they'd stop at nothing to get it. I knew then that I had two choices: I could fall apart or I could fight back. And there was no question in my mind. I wasn't going to let them win. I'd use my skills, my connections, and everything at my disposal to make sure they paid for what they had done. But I wouldn't do it out of anger. No, this would be calculated, methodical. I would strike at the heart of their conspiracy in a way they would never see coming. And as I sat there, staring at the incriminating photos on the screen, I made a decision. I would take them down. Elegantly. And with a vengeance. The shock of the discovery began to settle, and in its place came a cold resolve. Olivia and Mark had played their hand, and now it was my turn. The betrayal stung, but it also ignited something in me, a desire for justice that went beyond just personal revenge. I had spent years building a career that I was proud of, not just for the wealth and status, but because I believed in the integrity of the legal profession. And now, those principles were at risk, tainted by the greed and manipulation of the very people I had trusted most. I sat in my office staring at the email with the damning photos. I didn't know where to start. I was a lawyer trained to think critically, to analyze facts and evidence. But this wasn't just another case. This was my life. The lines between personal and professional were now blurred, and I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I needed a plan, one that would expose their conspiracy without leaving any room for doubt. I thought about the resources I had at my disposal. As a senior attorney at the firm, I had access to confidential documents and case files that no one else did. I could use that access, not only to gather more evidence but to learn how deep this conspiracy went. But I had to be careful. If anyone suspected what I was doing, it could ruin me. The legal world could be unforgiving, especially when you're up against powerful people like Olivia and Mark. I spent the next few days quietly observing, gathering small pieces of information. Mark had been unusually ambitious lately, constantly trying to one-up me in meetings, suggesting strategies that could undermine my standing at the firm. I had always chalked it up to youthful enthusiasm, but now I saw it for what it really was: a calculated move to position himself as the top dog. He was playing the long game, and Olivia had been the perfect accomplice all along. Then I got lucky. One afternoon, while Olivia was in a meeting with the firm's partners, I had an opportunity to access some of the more sensitive files in her office. I knew her password, one she'd used for years. I entered her office and quickly navigated to the folder containing ongoing cases. I was looking for something specific. Any evidence of manipulation, something that could tie her and Mark to a larger scheme. After hours of sifting through files and documents, I finally found what I was looking for: a set of communications between Olivia and Mark. They had been conspiring to influence the outcome of a major case, one that was about to make waves in the media. A high-profile client with ties to powerful political figures. The case was worth millions, and if they could manipulate the verdict, they stood to gain everything. The more I read, the clearer their plan became. Mark had been feeding Olivia inside information about the case's strategy. They had even discussed bribing witnesses and altering evidence to ensure a favorable outcome. The case wasn't just about winning, it was about securing a massive payout that would allow them to both move up the ladder at my expense. I sat back, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about a personal betrayal anymore. This was a serious crime. And it wasn't just Olivia and Mark involved, it was the whole firm. The corruption ran deeper than I had ever imagined. But now I had the ammunition I needed. They had made a critical mistake, leaving a trail of evidence that was too strong to ignore. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act. The next step was to take this information to the right people. But I couldn't go to the police, not yet. The legal world had its own ways of dealing with issues like this, and if I went to the authorities, I would be putting everything at risk. No, I needed a more strategic approach. I decided to turn to the firm's ethics board. They were tasked with investigating misconduct within the firm, and they had the power to remove partners and bring disciplinary actions against lawyers. I knew that if I presented them with the evidence I had gathered, they would have no choice but to launch an investigation. But I had to be careful. Olivia and Mark were smart, they wouldn't go down easily. I needed to make sure that my evidence was airtight, and that there was no chance of them covering their tracks. I spent the next few days putting together a comprehensive report. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that connected Olivia and Mark to the conspiracy. I organized everything meticulously, making sure that there was no room for doubt. When it was done, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I was ready. But before I could present my findings to the ethics board, I needed to make one final move. I couldn't let Olivia and Mark see me coming. I had to stay under the radar until everything was in place. I began planting subtle seeds of doubt, dropping hints that something was off in our firm's internal affairs. I didn't know if they would catch on, but I couldn't take any chances. The pieces were in place. I had the evidence, the strategy, and the patience to wait. I knew that once I made my move, things would never be the same. I wasn't just going to expose their conspiracy, I was going to destroy it. The days dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last as I waited for the right moment. The anticipation was maddening, but I had learned long ago that patience was just as powerful a weapon as knowledge. I couldn't afford to rush things. One mistake, one misstep, and all my work could unravel. So, I bided my time watching Olivia and Mark, observing their movements with a steady, calculated eye. I noticed that Olivia had become increasingly paranoid. She'd started checking her phone more frequently, always with a nervous glance around the office as if afraid someone might see. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew that I was on to her. But for now, she played her role, pretending nothing had changed, pretending everything was normal. Mark, on the other hand, seemed bolder, more confident. He had no idea that his every move was being watched. I'd already planted the seeds of doubt within the firm, subtly letting slip information about internal inconsistencies. Whispers of potential misconduct had begun to circulate among the partners, and the walls were starting to close in on them. But I needed something more definitive, something that would leave no room for ambiguity. I couldn't just rely on rumors and innuendo. I needed to be sure that once I exposed them, there would be no way out. The moment came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, Olivia sent me an urgent text message. "We need to talk. Meet me in the conference room in 30 minutes. It was as if she knew I was about to make my move. I wondered if she suspected that I had uncovered something, or perhaps it was just another one of her usual manipulative games. Either way, this would be the moment where everything came to a head. I walked into the conference room, my mind sharp and focused. Olivia was already there, standing by the large window, her back to me. The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel the weight of what was about to happen. She turned slowly as I entered, a faint smile playing on her lips, but it was empty, insincere. "James," she said coolly, her voice low, "we need to discuss your recent behavior. You've been distant, and I've noticed you've been asking questions about things you shouldn't." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I locked eyes with her, the pieces of my plan falling into place. I could feel my heart rate steadying as the anger that had been building inside me turned into something more focused, more precise. "You're right," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've been distant. But I think it's time we have a real conversation about what's been going on behind closed doors." Olivia's expression faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. She knew. She could feel that I knew. "What are you talking about?" she asked, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. I took a step closer, careful not to rush. I wanted her to squirm, to realize that she was trapped. "I'm talking about you and Mark. The manipulation of the case, the conspiracy. The plan to push me out of the firm and take everything I've built. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Her face drained of color, and for the first time in years, I saw the cracks in her composure. She took a step back, but I wasn't done. "I know about the emails, Olivia. I know about the plans you've made with him. The way you've been using me as a stepping stone for your own gain. And I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've worked for." She was silent for a moment, her gaze shifting to the door as though contemplating running. But she knew it was too late. I had already gathered too much evidence. She was caught. "I can't believe you do this to me," I continued, my voice hardening. "You were the one person I trusted. We built this life together, and you've been lying to me the entire time." Olivia's eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and defiance. "You don't understand, James. Mark and we were just doing what we had to do to survive. You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter. You don't know what it's like to fight for something, to claw your way to the top. You're stuck in your perfect little world, and I wanted more." Her words stung, but I didn't let them show. "You could have had everything without all this. But you chose the easy way. And now you're going to pay the price." Olivia's shoulders slumped, and she let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is over? You think you can just expose us and walk away unscathed? Mark and I have been planning this for months. You're not the only one with power here, James. You can't touch us." I knew she was trying to bluff, but the confidence in her voice was shaken. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "I already have everything I need to expose you, Olivia. The emails, the case files, the evidence. It's all here. I've already sent it to the ethics board. The media will be involved soon enough, and the firm won't be able to protect you." Her face twisted with panic, and for a moment, I saw the desperation in her eyes. The facade had finally cracked. "You're done," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Mark too. And when this is all over, I'm going to make sure you never practice law again." Olivia's lips trembled as she fought to maintain her composure, but it was clear that the game was up. She had no more cards to play. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The revenge was almost complete, but the real work was just beginning. There would be no more hiding, no more manipulation. Olivia and Mark had crossed a line, and now they would have to face the consequences. The next few days felt like a blur of meetings, phone calls, and quiet victories. The moment I handed over the evidence to the ethics board, the clock began ticking. I had done my part. Now it was out of my hands. The investigation into Olivia and Mark and the firm itself was inevitable. And with it, the fallout would be catastrophic. I could almost hear the whispers echoing through the halls of the firm, the subtle tension among the partners as they realized that everything they had worked for could crumble. What they didn't know was that the collapse had already begun, and I was watching from the sidelines, feeling a strange detachment. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? Justice. The truth laid bare for all to see. But as the investigation gained momentum, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer a part of this world. I'd thought that once the truth was revealed, it would bring me peace. But instead, I found myself watching as my entire career, my life as I had known it, started to disintegrate. The firm was embroiled in a scandal of epic proportions. The media latched on to every detail, every whisper, and every shred of information I had carefully provided. The stories broke one after the other, exposing the corruption, the manipulation of cases, the illegal activities that had been going on for years under the polished surface of the firm's reputation. Olivia and Mark were the focus of the headlines. They were painted as villains, the masterminds behind the conspiracy. But no one could have predicted the extent of the damage. What began as a scandal involving just two individuals soon revealed the rot within the entire system. Several high-ranking partners were implicated, and the entire firm began to unravel. Lawsuits were filed, clients withdrew, and clients' once dominant positions in the legal world became precarious. The firm was on the brink of collapse. I watched from a distance, knowing that there was nothing I could do to stop the wave of destruction. It felt surreal, almost like I was an observer in my own life. I'd expected satisfaction, even triumph, but instead, there was only a growing emptiness inside me. Then came the day of reckoning for Olivia and Mark. They were both suspended from the firm pending further investigation. But I knew the outcome was inevitable. The ethics board had enough evidence to bring criminal charges. Olivia, once a partner and my trusted wife, was now a defendant. Mark, the ambitious young attorney, was facing the same fate. The police were involved now, and the weight of the law would soon bear down on them. I didn't attend the hearings, didn't watch as they stood before the board to answer for their actions. It felt like a formality, a foregone conclusion. Olivia's career was over, and Mark's ambition had led him to a dead end. I had expected anger, even a sense of satisfaction. But when the day came, I felt nothing but a quiet resignation. Their fate was sealed, and mine? Well, it was still uncertain. As the investigation concluded and the media's frenzy settled, I sat in my office alone, reflecting on the events. I had won, at least in the traditional sense. But the victory felt hollow. There was no sense of triumph in taking down the people who had betrayed me. There was no joy in seeing them suffer, even though they deserved it. They had taken everything from me, but in the end, I had taken everything from them. The office, once a place of power and confidence, now felt like a cage. I stared out the window watching the city below, but it no longer felt like home. The skyline that once symbolized my success now felt like a reminder of all I had lost, all that I had given up in the name of justice. I had been a part of a system that valued power, money, and influence, and I had played that game better than anyone. But in the end, I realized that it was a game I no longer wanted to play. I couldn't stay in this world any longer. The law, the firm, the ambition, it had all become tainted in my eyes. The drive for success had blinded me to the very thing I had once believed in: true justice. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. I had spent my entire life fighting to win cases, to climb the ladder, to prove myself worthy of the title top attorney. But in doing so, I had lost my sense of purpose. And when I looked at the mess Olivia and Mark had caused, I saw only one truth. The legal world had its own dark side, and I had been too willing to ignore it. As the firm crumbled under the weight of the scandal, I made a decision. I would leave. There was no other choice. The world I had worked so hard to build was gone, and there was no way to salvage it. I couldn't stay in a place that had become a symbol of everything I despised. So, I took what little remained, my reputation, my integrity, and I walked away. I called the ethics board, informing them that I would be stepping down from my position at the firm. No one tried to stop me. There was no debate, no resistance. It was clear that my time had come. I took a deep breath, stepped out of my office for the last time, and left the building that had been my life for so many years. But as I walked out onto the streets of Chicago, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The burden of the past, of all the lies and manipulation, was finally lifted. I could start over. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The decision to leave the firm wasn't easy, but in the weeks that followed, I realized it was the only thing that made sense. It was strange stepping away from the only world I had ever known. But as I walked down the streets of Chicago, free from the suffocating weight of my past, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't expected. The firm, once the pinnacle of my success, now seemed like a distant memory. I was no longer bound to a world of manipulation, deceit, and power struggles. I didn't have a plan at first. I'd spent years climbing the corporate ladder, fighting for every promotion, every case, every victory. But now, the thought of stepping back into that world repulsed me. The pursuit of success, the desire to win at all costs, it had left me hollow. The price I had paid, the sacrifices I had made were too high. I couldn't go back to that. So, I began to think about what truly mattered to me. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was something much simpler: justice. Real justice. Not the kind that was bought or manipulated, but the kind that came from standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. I had been a part of a system that had become broken, corrupt, and driven by power, and I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. I wanted to rebuild my life from the ground up, but this time I would do it on my own terms. I started small. I opened a modest office, far from the sleek, intimidating towers of downtown Chicago. It was a space that felt real, not like the polished, cold corporate environments I had been used to. The office was simple, with a worn desk and a few chairs, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I began taking on cases that truly mattered, cases that involved people who had been wronged by the system, who had no other recourse but to turn to someone who would fight for them. It was different from the high-profile corporate cases I was used to. There were no million-dollar settlements, no prestigious clients. But there was something more fulfilling in the work I was doing. I was helping real people, people who needed justice, not just legal victories. As I worked, I found myself reconnecting with the principles I had once believed in. I no longer cared about winning for the sake of winning. I cared about fairness, about doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. My new firm, though small, became a place where truth mattered more than anything else. I surrounded myself with like-minded attorneys, people who shared my vision of a legal system that was fair and just, not corrupted by greed. The cases weren't always easy and the work wasn't always glamorous. There were times when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But then I would look at the people I was helping, the ones who came to me with nothing but a story, a hope that someone would listen, and I knew I was on the right path. In the quiet of my small office, I found a kind of peace I had never known in the whirlwind of my previous life. I no longer had to worry about office politics, about climbing the corporate ladder, about playing the game. I had traded all that for something simpler but far more meaningful. As the months passed, my reputation began to grow, but this time, it wasn't about the cases I won or the power I wielded. It was about the integrity I brought to my work, the genuine care I had for the people who needed me. My new firm was slowly gaining respect, not because of its size or its wealth, but because it stood for something real. One evening, after a long day of work, I stood at the window of my office, looking out over the city. The skyline was still there, but it felt different now. I had once been a part of that world, driven by ambition and success, but I had walked away from it all. And in doing so, I had found something far more important: freedom. I had been broken by the system, but I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and in the process, I had rediscovered what it meant to be truly alive. I had found a way to make a difference, not by playing the game but by changing the rules. And as I stood there, watching the city below, I realized that I was finally at peace. I had done the right thing. And in the end, that was all that mattered.